I was standing behind a man at the county clerk's office last Tuesday, just one of those mundane errands.
Right.
And this guy, he was dressed in this really sharp suit, and he just radiated this confidence, the kind of confidence you only see in people who truly, deeply believe the system works for them.
They're a walking embodiment of the official story.
Exactly. And he was there to renew a simple travel permit, but he called it a fundamental right, with this proud, almost defiant tilt of his chin. He even joked with the clerk about how lucky we were to live in a land where freedom was a given, not a gift. I mean, he was the poster child for a thriving modern society.
But then something changed.
Oh, it changed. The clerk asked for his mandatory living contribution, which is just a tax on existing, and a detailed log of his labor for the past quarter.
And the smile vanished.
It didn't just fade, it curdled. He started arguing, and he was using all the buzzwords, equity, social benevolence, all these phrases he'd clearly just absorbed from the nightly news.
Programming.
And in front of my eyes, he went from this dignified citizen to something else entirely. The clerk was just stone-faced, and the man's posture, it just broke. He began to plead. His voice dropped to this submissive, almost desperate pitch. He was practically begging for the mercy of a bureaucrat just to get access to a public domain.
A chilling transfer.
1 minute, he was the master of his own destiny. The next, he was a dog begging for a scrap of his own autonomy.
And the worst part is he probably didn't even see the contradiction.
And what he didn't realize, and what I think most of the people in that crowded, silent line failed to see, was that the freedom he was so proud of was just a permit held on a very short leash.
He was celebrating the splendor of his own cage.
Oblivious to the fact that the locks had been changed years ago. And this is the most haunting part. Even after paying the ridiculous fee and tucking the permit away, he turned to me.
And what did he say?
He whispered, "Thank God we're still free." Still entranced by the siren song of a lie, completely unaware that the realization of the true cost, it had come just a moment too late.
That vignette is, it's terrifying because of how banal it is, how normal it sounds.
Right.
It captures the exact texture of the modern condition, that absolute dissonance between the rhetoric of liberty and the reality of total administrative control.
And that moment, that look in his eyes when he realized his rights were actually just privileges that could be revoked at any time, that's the catalyst for this whole deep dive.
We're peeling back the layers today.
We're stripping away all the varnish.
Yeah.
We are looking at a stack of materials that argue this transition from a free human to a permitted subject. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't just bureaucracy gone wrong.
No, we're investigating the concept of a hard reset.
A hard reset.
The theory really is that the history we know, the economy we all participate in, and even the technology we use every day, they're not just tools, they're mechanisms of containment.
It's a pretty staggering idea. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to look at what some call the lost age of abundance, and this gets into the really controversial theory of Tartaria. Then we're going to dive into the erasure of identity, looking at it through the frankly horrifying historical lens of the Orphan Trains.
And finally, we'll touch on the cycle of collapse, the idea that this has all happened before, and it's designed to happen again. And through it all, we're going to apply the philosophical framework of Jacques Ellul and his concept of the technological society. Because if you really want to understand the cage, you have to understand the architect.
Okay, so let's start with that lost age. To really understand how much we've lost, we first have to imagine what might have been.
A different timeline.
A completely different timeline. I was digging through some archives lately, and I stumbled upon this narrative that, it really makes you question the official version of the late 19th century. It asks you to imagine a man named Elias. He's a master mason, and he lives in a city that looks less like a modern metropolis and more like a cathedral of light.
A cathedral of light.
I saw a sketch of him in this old digital archive, and he's standing next to this magnificent copper-domed structure that supposedly harvested atmospheric energy.
So the Tartarian architecture we've heard about.
Precisely. And in this world, Elias didn't understand concepts like bills or debt. To him, the city was this living organism, and it provided for its children. Energy was just there, like the air.
Abundance, true abundance.
But then the hard reset began. I read that within just a few years, Elias watched as his beautiful spires were torn down, or worse, retrofitted with these clunky wires and coal-burning furnaces.
The beginning of the grid.
The birth of the meter, the device that put a price on existence itself. In his journals, he wrote about this heaviness that settled over the people. They weren't just losing free energy, they were losing their leisure, their spirit.
Your autonomy.
Exactly. When I read about Elias, it just strikes me how the shift from abundance to this artificial scarcity wasn't just an economic change, it was deeply psychological. And while, some might see this as just technological progress, if you look at it through Elias's eyes, it feels like a deliberate dismantling of human freedom.
That we can be convinced we have to pay for something that was once our birthright.
Yeah.
And this narrative of Elias, it perfectly frames the Tartarian hypothesis. It directly challenges that foundational assumption in our history books.
It is.
The idea that the 19th century was this primitive time, just horses, buggies, and the slow, painful birth of industry.
Right. When we look at the photos, and I mean those big panoramic shots of cities like Moscow, San Francisco, or even parts of New York in the 1860s, the 1870s, there's a massive discrepancy.
That's what I call the horse and buggy discrepancy. You look at the street level in these old photos, and what do you see? You see mud, unpaved roads, people in simple clothes, riding horses or driving these little wooden carts. And then you look up.
And towering over them are these massive neoclassical megastructures, stone cathedrals, capitol buildings with these impossibly intricate domes, star forts with perfect geometric precision.
Buildings that would be a challenge to construct even today with all our modern technology.
And the official narrative tells us that these were built by the people down in the mud, that guys with chisels and handsaws who didn't even have power tools or modern cranes built the Sinner building or the original Penn Station in, a couple of years?
It strains credulity, to say the least.
So the Tartaria theory, it posits that this is all a lie.
A foundational lie. The theory suggests that Tartaria wasn't just a country, but a global civilization. A hidden past.
Yeah.
And this civilization was advanced, it was peaceful, and it was technologically superior to ours.
Okay, so the people we see in the photos, the people we call our ancestors from the Gilded Age.
They weren't the builders. They were the inheritors.
They found the cities empty.
Yeah. They moved into the ruins of a higher civilization that had been wiped out by some sort of cataclysm.
Which connects directly back to the free energy aspect you mentioned, the story of Elias.
Exactly. The architecture wasn't just aesthetic, it was functional, it was technology.
This is the part that, it completely changes how you look at the world. We look at a cathedral spire or a capitol dome and we think religion or government.
Symbols of power.
Right.
Yeah.
But the theory argues these were actually machines.
Capacitors.
Yeah.
Conductors. The claim is that the specific geometry of these buildings, the use of materials like red brick, copper, and gold, was all designed to harvest ether, or what we call atmospheric electricity.
A wireless energy grid. On a global scale.
A clean, free, wireless energy grid.
And that brings us back to the hard reset. Because if you have a civilization running on free wireless energy, you have a huge problem if your goal is to control them.
You have a massive problem. You cannot meter the air.
No.
If energy is abundant and free, you can't enforce the mandatory living contribution we heard about in the opening story. You can't create a debt-based economy.
It's impossible.
So, to install the system of control, what the philosopher Jacques Ellul calls technique, you first have to destroy the abundance. You have to manufacture scarcity.
So the retrofitting that Elias witnessed in the story, taking down the spires, installing the wires in the coal furnaces, that was the installation of the cage.
It was the deliberate creation of scarcity. You destroy the clean, free tech, and you replace it with dirty, inefficient, metered tech.
And once you do that, you force people to pay for heat and light.
Which forces them to work for wages.
Which forces them into the tax system.
And suddenly, everyone is on the leash.
But to hide a global civilization, that's a monumental task. You would need a cataclysm. You can't just tell everyone, hey, forget about that giant advanced empire that was here yesterday.
And this brings us to the mud flood.
The physical evidence.
This is the physical evidence that proponents of the theory point to. And it's one of those things where once you see it, it is very, very hard to unsee.
It's the buried ground floor phenomenon.
Exactly.
I've walked past these buildings my whole life and never really questioned it. You see them everywhere. The old brownstones in New York or the buildings in London or Boston where the first floor is halfway underground.
And there are windows going straight into the dirt, or doors that open up to a brick wall 3 feet below the modern sidewalk.
Right. And the standard architectural explanation is what? Light wells?
Light wells. Or that they gradually raise the street level over decades to install sewage systems and trolley lines.
Which sounds plausible, I guess, at first.
Until you really think about it. The mud flood theory argues that this isn't gradual at all. It's evidence of a massive, sudden soil liquefaction event. A cataclysm that buried the bottom 1, 2, sometimes even 3 stories of buildings worldwide, all at roughly the same time.
I saw a discussion in the research notes about Vitruvius architecture, this idea that the ancients just built really deep foundations for stability.
Sure, foundations are deep, but one of the counterpoints was just so visceral and simple. Why would you build a beautifully ornate door that opens directly into a wall of soil? Why would you build a window that looks at nothing but dirt?
And it's nonsensical.
It suggests that the ground level rose rapidly and catastrophically. And the people who came after, the inheritors we talked about, they just dug out what they could and started building on top of the mud.
And then there's the other side of it, not just burying the evidence, but actively destroying it. Which brings us to the world's fairs.
Yes, the great expositions. Specifically, the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, 1915.
This one is maybe the most glaring anomaly of all.
The official history states that in 1915, San Francisco, a city that had just been almost completely destroyed by an earthquake and fire only 9 years prior, built a massive Roman-style city.
And we're not talking about a few buildings. We're talking about the Palace of Fine Arts, huge domes, intricate statuary, electric lighting, lagoons, an entire city for millions of visitors.
An architectural marvel.
And they say they built it all out of plaster and hemp.
Right. Plaster mixed with horsehair. They claim it was all temporary, a stage set.
And then as soon as the fair was over, they did what?
They demolished it, reduced it all to rubble.
Logistic sense. The manpower, the resources, the sheer artistic skill required to build something that magnificent just to tear it all down a year later.
It's absurd on its face. The alternative theory, the hard reset theory, is that San Francisco was an ancient Tartarian city.
So the fair wasn't a construction project.
It was a demolition project disguised as a celebration. They allowed the public to tour the magnificent old city one last time. They gave it a cover story. Look what we modern people built for you. And then they destroyed it to wipe the memory of the previous civilization from the map.
It's the perfect crime. You destroy the evidence in plain sight and you get everyone to applaud you for it by calling it a celebration of progress.
Absolutely.
But let's get into the why. Why go through all this trouble, this massive century-long deception? This is where the philosopher Jacques Ellul comes in.
Ellul is the key to understanding the motivation. In his book, The Technological Society, he describes something he calls technique.
And he doesn't just mean technology in the sense of gadgets and machines, right?
He means system, the all-encompassing machine that organizes society, that prioritizes efficiency and measurement above all else. It's a way of thinking.
And he talks about artificial necessity.
Yes. The hard reset isn't just about changing the buildings. It's about changing the fundamental environment of human life. Ellul argues that the machine, or technique, destroys the natural world specifically to replace it with an artificial one.
Why?
Because in the natural world, things flow. They're abundant, chaotic, and free. In the artificial world, things are measured, controlled, and scarce.
The meter. That brings us back to the meter.
The meter is the symbol of the new god. Ellul goes so far as to call the clock the most important machine ever invented.
More important than the steam engine or the computer. Why the clock?
Because it dissociates man from organic rhythms, sunrise, sunset, the seasons. It forces him into abstract mechanical time. It makes him a cog that must operate on the machine's schedule, not his own.
In a world of free energy, in the world of Elias, you don't need the clock in the same way. You don't need the meter. Your life isn't governed by the need to sell your hours to pay for your survival.
But to create what economists call homo economicus man, it's a purely economic unit. You need scarcity. You need efficiency. You need measurement. You need control. Ellul argues that technique requires the elimination of all free resources.
Because anything free can't be measured or controlled. It's outside the system.
It's a threat to the system. So the hard reset is the implementation of the technological cage. It is the deliberate destruction of natural abundance to force dependence on the artificial system.
A system of manufactured need.
And to ensure that dependence, you can't just change the physical world. You have to go deeper. You have to change the internal world. You have to erase the identity of the population itself.
Which brings us to the second, and maybe even more disturbing, stage of the reset. If you are going to repurpose an entire civilization, you need a new workforce. A workforce that doesn't remember who they used to be. You need a blank slate.
And this is where the history becomes incredibly dark. This is where we have to talk about the orphan train.
Yeah. I found another narrative in the research, this one about a girl named Clara. And I think it's important because it grounds this massive theory in very real human suffering. I was scrolling through some historical threads and I came across these haunting accounts of the orphan train movement. And it asks you to imagine this young girl, Clara, in the mid-1800s. She's standing on a platform in some dusty Midwestern town.
Just a child.
A child. And she was one of thousands of children who were stripped of their ancestral technical sovereignty. That's the phrase they use.
What does that mean exactly?
It's the idea that these were children from families who possessed the old world knowledge, how things actually worked, how to be self-sufficient, maybe even how the old technology functioned. The state took them, wiped their records clean, and placed them in what they called docile environments.
To be raised as what?
To be raised as the first generation of modern tax-paying subjects. I read a letter she supposedly wrote where she said she couldn't remember her mother's face, only the cold, systematic way her name was changed.
A foundational psyop, a psychological operation.
By severing that link to the past, the system didn't just get laborers, it got blank slates. Children who would grow up believing the state was their only provider.
Their only family?
It's easy to get lost in the big political implications of state control. But if you look at Clara, the tragedy is so deeply personal. It's about the complete erasure of identity.
And whether you believe it was a grand conspiracy or just a horribly misguided social experiment.
The result was the same. A generation that forgot they were divine beings and just accepted their roles as cogs in a materialist machine. It's a story that reminds you why history and heritage are always the first things targeted during any kind of reset.
That term, ancestral technical sovereignty, is crucial. It's so potent. It implies that freedom isn't just a right you're given. It's a skill, a body of knowledge that's passed down from parent to child. How to build, how to heal, how to live without the system. And if you break that chain of transmission...
the skill is lost, maybe forever.
And the scale of this break was just massive. We're not talking about a few isolated cases.
No, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of children.
Between 1854 and 1929, the estimates are around 250,000 children were relocated. That's 250,000 links in the chain of history, just severed.
And the popular myth, the Little Orphan Annie story, is that these were benevolent charities finding loving homes for poor children who had no parents.
But the sources we've looked at, they paint a very, very different picture.
It's the orphan myth.
The law review sources we have indicate that up to 75%, 3/4 of these children were not orphans at all. They had living parents.
So this was kidnapping, or at the very least, coercive extraction from families deemed unsuitable.
It was targeted. These were the children of the poor, of recent immigrants, and specifically of Catholics living in the eastern cities. The organizations running this, like the Children's Aid Society founded by Charles Loring Brace, were explicit about their goals.
Brace wanted to save them.
He wanted to save them from their parents' culture, which he viewed as culturally inferior. The stated goal was assimilation, to take these wild children and mold them into compliant Anglo-Saxon Protestant American subjects.
It reminds me so much of the indigenous boarding schools, the whole kill the Indian, save the man philosophy.
It is the exact same mechanism. The playbook is identical. Erase and replace. You destroy the lineage to ensure national unity.
But in the context of the hard reset and the Tartaria theory, there's an even more practical and more sinister utility to this.
Yes. This is where it connects back to the inheritors theory.
Okay.
If we accept the premise that a major cataclysm occurred, a mud flood, and that these magnificent cities were left empty or severely depopulated.
You need to repopulate them.
You do, but you can't use the old population or what's left of them.
Because they remember.
They remember the old world. They remember the free energy. They remember the truth of what was lost. They still possess that ancestral technical sovereignty. They're not blank slates.
So you need incubator children, a fresh start.
You take the children, you completely separate them from the old knowledge, and you ship them out west to fill the empty dugout cities. The theory suggests that many of these so-called orphans were actually foundlings from the post-cataclysm chaos.
This would explain the break in knowledge we see in architecture and engineering. I've always wondered about that.
So?
Well, we have these incredible buildings from the 1800s that we literally cannot replicate today, not without spending billions and using advanced computer modeling. The stone masonry is perfect. The engineering is genius. And yet, the generation that immediately followed them.
A generation of the early 1900s.
They seemed to completely forget how to do it. We went from magnificent stone cathedrals to, brick rectangles.
Because the fathers weren't there to teach the sons. The orphans had no lineage. They didn't know how to build the magnificent Capitol dome. They only knew how to sweep its floors.
They didn't know how the atmospheric energy system worked.
They only knew how to read the new meter that the state installed on the wall.
They became what Ellul calls mass man.
A man without a family history, without a tradition, is entirely dependent on the state for his identity. He is malleable. He is docile.
He fits perfectly into the industrial machine.
Because he has no natural community, no ancestral knowledge to fall back on. His only loyalty is to the system that feeds him.
It creates a completely closed loop. The physical environment is controlled by the new metered technology, and the mental environment is controlled by the lack of memory.
And once you have erased the memory, you can write whatever history you want on that blank slate.
You can tell them, we built this for you.
You are free.
Pay your taxes.
And they have no reference point, no ancestral memory to dispute it.
It's gaslighting on a civilizational scale. But the sources suggest this wasn't just a one-time event. This wasn't just the 19th century reset. It's a cycle.
It's a cycle. And this brings us to the concept of est ordo, the order.
I want to share the final narrative I found, the story of a man named Julian. This one really shook me because it feels less like history and more like a prophecy.
Okay.
There's this concept I've been researching called est ordo, the idea of a ritualistic cycle of societal collapse. And this theory suggests our grandest civilizations are essentially harvested once they reach a peak of decadence.
Like a crop.
Exactly. And the story asks you to imagine a scholar named Julian living in a high culture era just before a mud flood style reorganization. He's walking through streets of marble and gold, but he realizes that the people around him, who are obsessed with materialism and hollow pleasures,
they're being fattened up for the reset.
Yes. In these narratives, the institutional gatekeepers don't just destroy, they wipe the collective memory. Julian tries to warn people that their history is about to be buried, literally under layers of sediment, but they are too distracted by the theater of their daily lives to listen. And while the mud flood might sound like an extreme historical theory, the idea of societal amnesia is very real. We see our culture rebooted all the time in ways that make us forget the wisdom of those who came before.
It's a call to stay awake.
It's a call to look past the materialist decay and hold on to the truths that the gatekeepers might want us to forget.
The ritual of harvest. That phrase, it turns the entire concept of civilization on its head. We like to think of civilization as a straight line going up. Progress, progress, more progress. Julian's story suggests it's not a line. It's a circle, or as you said, a crop cycle.
You grow the civilization, you let it accumulate wealth, knowledge, and infrastructure.
And then when it's ripe, you harvest it.
And then you wipe the memory so the next crop doesn't know what happened to the last one.
Which connects directly to the phantom time hypothesis that was mentioned in the sources.
This is the Anatoly Fomenko theory, the Russian mathematician.
His new chronology.
Yes.
Fomenko used statistical analysis of historical texts and astronomical records, and he argued that our timeline is false, that vast swaths of the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages, are largely a fabrication or a duplication of later events, all designed to stretch out the timeline.
So we might not actually be in the year 2026. We might be in the year 1000 or maybe 3000. We have no real idea.
The date on the calendar is just another meter. It's another control mechanism. If you don't know when you are, you don't know who you are. Fomenko argues this timeline manipulation was done to hide the existence of the Tartarian Empire, to make the lost age seem like ancient, disconnected history, rather than a recent, tangible reality.
It creates what Ellul calls a verbal universe.
Ellul says modern man does not live in reality. He lives in a world constructed of words, images, and propaganda. The verbal universe is the map that has completely covered the territory.
So the history books, the nightly news, the political debates, the social media feeds, they are the screen. They're the matrix.
And Ellul has a very specific and unusual view on propaganda. He says its primary function is to act as anesthesia.
Anesthesia, not just deception.
Not just deception. Think about the man at the county clerk's office from your story. He is living in a cage. He's being exploited. His so-called rights are a fiction. To endure that reality day after day without going insane, he needs a story.
He needs to believe he is free.
He needs to believe the system is benevolent and just. Propaganda isn't just lies told by the state. It's the drug the population willingly takes to make the surgery of modern life bearable.
So we tell ourselves, thank God we're still free, as we hand over our labor logs and our mandatory living contribution.
And the est ordo cycle suggests that when the anesthesia starts to wear off, or when the system becomes too decadent and inefficient to sustain itself, the harvest happens.
The Reddit threads we saw talk about this happening right now, a financial reset, a digital reset.
It's the modern equivalent of the mud flood. Think about the orphan trains again. What did they do? They severed the physical lineage.
Right.
What severs the informational lineage today? A digital wipe.
If the internet goes down, if the cloud servers are erased.
We have no books anymore. We don't have physical records. We don't even remember phone numbers. If the digital archive is wiped, we become the new orphans instantly.
We become the blank slate for the next order. This all leads us to the end game. We've talked about the mechanics of the cage, the bars, the lock. But is there a locksmith? Is there some group of elites sitting in a dark room planning all of this? Or is it something else?
This is Ellul's most terrifying and perhaps most important insight. He argues that technique is autonomous.
Autonomous, meaning it drives itself.
It drives itself. There is no pilot in the cockpit. Ellul argues that the system operates by its own internal laws of efficiency and self-augmentation. It means if a technology can be built, it must be built. If a process can be made more efficient by removing a human freedom, it will be done. Not because some villain in a volcano lair wants it to happen, but because the abstract logic of the system itself demands it. Efficiency is its only god.
So even the gatekeepers, the elites, the bankers, the politicians, they're just high-level servants of the machine.
They're the maintenance crew. They might think they're in charge, they might enjoy the perks, but they're just greasing the gears of a machine that's running on its own. This is why political revolutions rarely change the fundamental nature of the cage. You swap the manager, but the factory keeps running on the same principles.
That is incredibly bleak. It means the splendor of the cage is almost inevitable.
Ellul calls it the final integration. This is the point where the individual is so psychologically conditioned, so completely dependent on the artificial environment for his every need, that he cannot even conceive of freedom outside the system. He loves his cage.
Celebrating the splendor of his own cage, back to the beginning.
And that is the trap, the absolute loss of the natural. We've forgotten what it feels like to be truly autonomous, to have that ancestral technical sovereignty. We only know how to ask for permits.
So Tartaria, whether it was a real historical place or a metaphor, it represents that lost state of grace, a time before the meter, a time before the orphanhood.
And est ordo is the recurring mechanism that keeps us from ever going back. It's the immune system of the cage, purging any memory of a different way of life.
Wow. We have covered a lot of dark territory today, from the mud-buried streets of a lost empire, to the train platforms where children were sold as labor, to the philosophical trap that binds us all today.
It is a heavy realization.
What?
But seeing the bars is the first step to understanding where you are. You can't escape a prison you don't know you're in.
And as we close out, there is one final piece from the source material. It's a poem of sorts, titled Descendants. And it feels like it sums up this entire cycle of folly, deceit, and the realization that always seems to come just a moment too late.
I can read it.
Please.
Descendants willingly plunge into ruin, trusting malice amongst men, a self-inflicted wound by citizens within a state where authority can conscript labor under deceitful guise of equity. This heralds societal demise and besmirches the nation's ethos, inculcated to blindly acquiesce. An oligarchy cloaked as governance terrorizes minds with dread whilst feigning benevolence. The state paradoxically imposes labor upon men through tax-like mandates on living while bestowing freedoms via permits to access public domains and travel.
That's the man in the clerk's office.
Under the yoke of psychological subjugation, individuals have transformed into docile subjects, begging government representatives, once dignified citizens now reduced in stature as mere dogs serving their oppressors, for evenings with fairness and mercy within a culture that is soured on monogamy's sacred bond, and that by design.
Wow.
Consequently, the populace stands defeated before power magnates cloaked by opulence while dependent. They serve merely like pawns in an expansive game of manipulation orchestrated by ruling elites. A society rotting internally with its own self-destruction whilst appealing to their oppressors through votes for fair treatment. The misguided seek solace in religious extremism as a panacea for their collective moral bankruptcy. unknowingly sowing the seeds from which disaster will harvest. They've been lured into deceit by media's hypnotic allure, an endless cycle of exploitation masked within splendor. And so these shall consume what fate has prepared for them, their excessive indulgence in material wealth leading to spiritual insatiation and societal collapse. Bloodshed echoes through time, the cries of ages unheeded as justice remains a specter haunting absent shores, a land bereft of retribution, yet basking blindly within its self-spawned decadence.
One final stanza.
Descendants, aware now their folly and deceits caused too late, the truth mocks from afar, while they remain entranced in the lie's siren song. A society unraveled by greed, forged through exploitation of others to sustain lavish lifestyles.
It repeats.
Descendants, aware now their folly and deceits cost too late. The truth mocks from afar, while they remain entranced in the lie's siren song. A society unraveled by greed, forged through exploitation of others to sustain lavish lifestyles. Est ordo.
Est ordo. It is the order. A final, chilling reminder that the cage wasn't built around us by accident. We walked into it, distracted by all the shiny things, until we heard the lock click behind us.
A powerful closing thought.
The sources really leave us with this one provocative idea. If the history books, the news, the entire official narrative is the verbal universe designed to keep us asleep, where do we find the truth?
Where do you even begin to look?
And maybe the only way to break the cycle is to stop asking the clerk for permission and start remembering what was buried in the mud. Stay curious and maybe, just maybe, start digging.